Hi, um, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and here with Bruce Fein, and it's not a Monday; it's a Tuesday. Uh, Apologize for the fine print not being yesterday, but today I had oral surgery yesterday, so we rescheduled for today. But I think today is a appropriate day to do it, and I'll let Bruce explain further before we get into the topics that we advertise will be today's conversation, because today should be a day that Americans should know about uh, and memorialize, because it was 265 years ago today that James Otis gave a compelling argument against writs of assistance, which today we would probably call administrative warrants. And John Adams was a witness to that speech, and uh, and John Adams cites it as the day that America began its protest against arbitrary power. Bruce, would you like to fill in the details of the importance of James Otis's speech and the irony that basically the position that Trump, Bondi, and Nome have taken is the exact same position that the British Crown took?
Yeah. Um, this James Otis was protesting against these with the general writs of assistance, general search warrants, which enabled every petty British officer to rummage through homes, businesses looking for typically contraband, um, and cited that that was simply an illegal application, even then, of the British common law. Remember that Britain, even today, has no constitution. So the rules that evolved were less, I would say, clear or manipulable than, uh, or more manipulable than under a written constitution. But anyway, the idea, let me try to quote from William Pitt the Elder. This is the idea of the equivalent of the Fourth Amendment in Great Britain at the time James Otis spoke. And he said as follows: every man in his cottage may bid defiance to all the forces of the crown. It may be frail, the rains may enter, the storms may enter, the wind may blow through it, but the King of England cannot enter. All his forces dare not cross the threshold of the ruined tenement. Didn't have any warrant. It doesn't matter how impoverished individuals were, the King of England can't enter. This is the right of privacy, the right to be let alone, and what Justice Louis Brandeis characterized as the most cherished right amongst civilized people. And that was the defense that James Otis was making against these efforts by the British to come in and just rummage through people's homes in search of any kind of contraband. And one thing that's important in understanding its philosophical predicate, it's certainly true when you require warrants, probable cause issued by independent magistrates. Some wrongdoing will escape detection. But in our philosophy of the United States, it's thought it's more important to protect privacy, to protect liberty, even if it means a few go unaccounted for, than it is to impinge on privacy rights to try to make sure no scoundrel escapes. That the liberty interest trumps the law enforcement interest when they come into collision. Um, because if you were only concerned about law enforcement, you'd say there's no limits on anything. You go into anybody's home, you can arrest anybody. You may be guilty, may not. You can detain them for as long as you want. If all you care about is just trying to make certain that any violation is punished, even when it means you end up committing more violations by punishing those who are innocent. So that's the difference, really, I think, Jeffrey, between a free and a despotic country. And one of the things that we are witnessing with regard to what I call the xenophobic efforts to enforce the immigration laws is turning that hierarchy on its head. Everything is it's possible would be an unauthorized immigrant. There are no rights that you have. You can be killed, you can be detained, you can be questioned just at random. It's not at random, of course, because the Trump ICE looks at your skin color, looks at your ethnicity, um, and decides whether or not you're going to be targeted, because they think politically, typically, if you're not focused on white people, then people won't care and they can flout the Constitution with impunity. But that's the general idea behind the Fourth Amendment, the right to be let alone unless there's serious evidence that you are implicated in some kind of wrongdoing, and that judgment is made by a neutral magistrate, not by the officers who are writing their own warrants. That's the gist of it.
Yeah, and isn't it ironic? Isn't it ironic that on the year that this administration claims it wants to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, that the words that started that Adams has described as the ones that inspired the beginning of our fight against arbitrary power, that actually this administration is more aligned with the king, as I wrote today in a post today, is more aligned with King George the third than President George Washington. So I think the irony is noted there. And the other comment that I had made on my post today was another irony, is that probably King George probably had more deference and respect for President George Washington than Donald Trump has.
Yeah, yes, for sure. And I think I might, Jeffrey, make an additional observation, and that is, in my view, if you take a survey of our government leaders today, not just with Mr. Trump, I am not confident that a single one of them would have joined and signed the Declaration of Independence, signed their death warrant, as opposed to joining the forces of King George III and the British. There's not a single one that I could say with confidence, yeah, they care more about liberty and defending unalienable rights than they do about power. That's a very sad tale to tell.
No, well, I think
that's where we are.
I think we already have Pence's testimony. When they make a choice between choosing loyalty and fidelity to Trump, as opposed to loyalty and fidelity to the Constitution, what Trump expected. And I think other comments that he has made, has indicated that you're right. He's more of a loyalist, by philosophy, and therefore most of the people in administration claim they're very aligned with him and his thinking. So that would put them also in the loyalist camp. They would not be in the camp of those that sat and signed the Declaration of Independence and decided that they would assert their right to be a free, liberty-loving people, and that they had said no to the abrogation of their encroachments on their liberty and their inalienable rights.
Yeah, and of course, one of the grievances against King George III was he was obstructing immigration. They wanted immigrants that came, as long as they were industrious, ambitious, comply with the rule of law. It didn't even conceive the Declaration, that we would be in the business of expelling immigrants, other those who may have committed crimes or came in with infectious diseases. A very tiny portion of what's happening today. And that is because despite shortcomings, everybody has warts, even countries, that the idea of America was the idea that your station in life was determined by only two things: your character and accomplishments, things within your control. Everybody else, all other things, you're equal in the eyes of the law. You could march your own drummer and you choose what your ambition wants to be. And it wasn't about building pyramids. It wasn't about conquering the world. I came, I saw, conquered. It was all about the thrill of every individual having the dignity and the right to chart their own destiny, to fall, make errors, learn by trial and error. No other country in the world has ever been founded on that basis. All these other countries, kings, queens, squires or something, divine right, and we're giving crumbs out to those below you. Even when you think about, the origin, say, of liberty and the Magna Carta. Magna Carta wasn't based upon a philosophy as everybody has particular rights because they're born. It's the Lord's got some freedoms from the King John at the time. Yeah, it was, okay, I'm giving you a little bit more power, discretion and liberties than you had otherwise. But the Declaration entirely reconfigured the idea of who individuals are in our universe. And the individual was the most important. And the greatness of a country is the opportunity of every individual, to develop their faculties and find their own meaning in life. That's it. Going to the moon, Mars, individuals can do that, but that's not the role of the government. If individuals want to try that, that's one thing, but it's not the government. Why the heck did we ever go to the moon anyway? Individuals want to do that. What is the moon? Well, we got Cephalon, pots and Tang orange drink. Really, we go to the moon for? And I'm not trying at all to disparage, the scientific developments and those who went and they had courage. They're doing what their job is. But if you ask, okay, we landed on the moon in 1969. Really, has the world gotten better since 1969? Landing on the moon, how has that contributed to diminishing injustice? How has that contributed, to having a more separation of powers, a more peaceful Earth? It's irrelevant to it. Why, given the fact that we need genius to come up with ways in which we can diminish our talent for killing each other, why are we going to the moon? We're taking our genius and diverting it to a triviality and impose the seriousness of life, which is, hey, peace, and we want opportunities for everyone. We want to have the march of the mind over the march of the foot soldier. That is really challenging, and we're squandering our genius by focusing on what I consider, juvenile amusements.
Well, it seems to me at the time of our founding era that the view towards immigration was we welcomed immigrants, and the privilege was not the right to settle in the United States. The privilege was to become a citizen, but not the act of settling. I mean, in the Madison's terms in his 1800 report to Congress, when he was, I guess, Secretary of State, referred to people who were here that were not yet naturalized citizen as alien friends. So they were greeted in friendship. I don't see much writings between the founders at that point in time that said that everyone that came here, had to come and prostrate themselves in front of a flag and kiss the president's rings or Madison's rings, and then agree with every word that was said from the White House. I don't think that was expected of the people that came here, and that basically this was a country that welcomed people, to come and settle here. At that point in time, settlers were not a burden on anyone because the government didn't provide. The government provided one thing: protection for people's liberty and freedom, and that's all people expected from the government was, that their property rights, whether they would be, as Madison read, rights in their property and property in their rights. That's basically most of what government function was did, and people came with the understanding that that's all government would provide for them is protection of their inalienable rights, and everything else was dependent upon them. And anyone who came under those conditions, the U.S. welcomed. They didn't say, oh, it's such a privilege to be here, come and kiss the ground and kiss the ring and, and prostrate yourself in front of the flag. It was, you come here and you respect liberty, we respect you. But it becomes a further privilege if you want to become a citizen, then there are certain hurdles you need to overcome in order to become a citizen. Is that a pretty fair description of
yes, it was. Typically, it was the citizenship just required a durational requirement. You've been here a certain number of years, 5 years. At one point, it was 14 years, but that's basically what it was. And I do think, Jeffrey, it wasn't just at the founding. I think that if you look at the Statue of Liberty and Lazarus's poem, give us your message, yes, yearning to breathe free. It showed that this was something that endured for 100 years. Really, it wasn't until the bigotry against Chinese workers but in the 1880s, that we even had any limitation other than that you're not supposed to come with a contagious disease. Anybody else could come. And we were a great relief when the Irish potato famine, the British were doing very stupid things that accentuated the potato famine than otherwise. And the Irish came here. They did not go to Great Britain. They came here in part because of our religious liberty. Most of the Irish were Catholic, and the British crown looked with great suspicion on anybody who was Catholic because of Henry VIII's history. And they came here to the United States, and they've contributed enormously, like other groups have, Italians all. I don't want to single out one over others. I think like every other organization or group, there's some miscreants, but by and large, they have the same percentage of those who are ambitious and peace-loving, law-abiding, and want families and an opportunity to develop their faculties. And they say that's what made us. We were going so fast. We went, think of this, Jeffrey. We had like 3 million total population, 13 little tiny states on Atlantic coast in 1787, say, when the Constitutional Convention. And within a century, and at that time, we were tiny. We were like a minnow looking at these empires. You got the British Empire, you got the French Empire, you got the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you got the Ottoman Empire, you got the Russian Empire. We're tiny. Within less than 100 years, we had soared past all of them, based upon this idea of freedom and the immigrants coming. It shows you, and it really, we started to slow down in our mastery once we decided we wanted to become a protectionist country. And I say we gave up and struck the Faustian bargain, at least by the time of the Spanish-American War, to, hey, let's be a global power. Let's compete with the empires instead of being a liberty beacon. And we've been progressively going downhill since then. But we showed that it does work. This is not just theory, that these ideas of liberty, of justice, of making sure that everybody gets evaluated on just accomplishments and on their character, it does create, it's not perfect society because mankind's made of imperfect timber, but it's optimal. It's better than any other by orders of magnitude, not just by a little bit. And that's what we have to get back to. It's going to take, in my judgment, a long time. It's going to take education. It's going to take leaders who emulate and incorporate, the standards of the framers. So it's not just theory. We can see our leaders are actually acting according to these theories and for being role models. You look in the White House, you're not looking for people you have role models for your kids, that's for sure. But it can be done, but it just takes us on this program and otherwise. We argue for it. It's the right thing to do. It shows that it works, and what makes us Americans unique in all the world. And in my view, we struggle for it, whether it succeeds in our lifetime. Change is slow. We didn't fall into an empire overnight. It's over a very long period of years, eliminating checks and balances and having an administrative state grow and grow. And then by leaps and bounds, first the Interstate Commerce Commission, and then the Trade Commission, and Federal Reserve Board, and then they began to multiply. And now we're kind of at their zenith, even though we have under Mr. Trump, and DOGE is supposed to be cutting the size of the federal government, but it really didn't save much anything. You look at it, where we are after DOGE, where's the budget deficit still are the trillions of dollars. We still have the borrowing that's out of sight, and the government regulation is everywhere. So it really was just a flash in the pan. It was PR, if you will. It didn't go to the substance, which is we got to get rid of the regulatory state. We got to get rid of these taxes. I'm somebody who believes that it should be a transition. People plan, and they should be able to get grandfathered in if they alter their life based upon a government representation that, hey, this is the rule of the game. But after the grandfather, we got to have a new generation that we don't make that pledge and mislead into having the government dictate what their business is going to be. But we're still have strong. We have time. We don't need a transition in 1 year, 2 years. We can phase it in. But that's clearly what needs to be done. I think that does justice to all the generations.
Yeah, I for me, justice, and we could get onto the other topic, but I'll just explain my point of view. Where we don't have to argue or discuss it. My point of view is simple. Okay, people have put money into, and had money put in on their behalf into trust funds, the Medicare trust fund, the Social Security trust funds. To me, the only thing that is just, because it's not just the people that made the promises. It's just to the people who had no voice in those promises, and they should not be held financially liable for upholding those promises that they had no party making. So for me, the solution is very simple. That is that whatever money has been, accumulated in the trust funds, attributed to each individual, which is the money contributed that they made from the monies taken out of their paychecks and the money, or unless they were, sole proprietors and they've been contributing themselves directly, and the company's contributions that were also made on their behalf, and the interest earned on those accounts being invested in treasuries, and whatever the balance is. I think the government should just cut a check, give everybody and saying is, we did our best with the money. They were put into a trust fund. There was never any government guarantee behind that trust fund. The trust fund was supposed to be self-funding. It didn't work out that way. We're giving you your money back. Assume responsibility for your own lives. You got now a big check, or whatever the size of the check is, but it's a check that's yours. It's not a claim against anybody else's. It's your money that either you put up or some other institution put up on your behalf, but it's yours, and we're giving it back to you. And be a responsible adult and take care of yourself. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't extend these systems, and I wouldn't pay people off, money that I wouldn't take money from future generations, given the fact that there's been the government has been saying for 30 years or something like that, that these funds are underfunded, and the people basically said, I don't care, I'll just tax another generation, but keep your word with me. I don't mind taking money out of other people's pocket. So we didn't have the right to be indifferent or stupid or unaware or ignorant. And then because we were any of those things, that we think we have a legitimate claim against other people's money. I just don't accept that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think there's alternate ways to look at this, Jeffrey. I'm not disputing at all your general observation. But my view is that although there's no perfect solution, that if the government makes a representation here, if you do X, then you get Y. They shouldn't change the rules in midstream, even if it means burdening some others who have to pay it off. Let me give you an example that may or may not be persuasive. The doctrine that we have of adverse possession. You occupy land, you treat it as your own, you weed it, you develop it. Nobody makes a rival claim for 21 years. Now, sometimes it can be 17 years. At that point, even if it really wasn't yours, you acted on the assumption that it was yours. You made a mistake. Somebody could say, you know what, here, the metes and bounds. If you look at this old title deed, it really is mine. We say, you know what, hey, that's too far gone. They relied on it 17 years, put in expectations. It's not a perfect analogy, but I think it shows the strength of the equitable idea that expectations should not be lightly overturned when they've grown up over a period of time. And we're not talking about programs, that are 2 years old or 3 years old. You've been around for the whole life. You're talking about some people, Jeffrey, they're 60, 70 years old. Just tell them, you know what, the rules of the game are going to change now.
Well,
to my mind, that's just not right. Even if it means, I understand your argument, but you shouldn't burn the younger generation with paying the folly of the older one. Well, I don't know. And I can see the preference on either side. I'd go in favor of those who are a little bit.
I'll make my point on this. I'm 70 years old. Okay,
Yeah.
The government has said the trust fund reports every year, and the reports have been that people should not expect to get 100 cents on the dollar if they don't fix the system. So the expectations have been where a trust fund has been running a report every year and says, look, in 2032, 33, 34, unless you put more money up, you're only going to get 70, 75 cents on the dollar. So the expectations have been created that unless people put more money up, they won't be able to sustain the payouts that were promised. So they've been told this for a long time and have ignored it. So if the government could be saying, "Don't worry, you're all going to get 100%," but no, there's a trustee from the trust fund. Everybody had the responsibility. Should I have my money in a trust fund, I should know the details of the trust fund. I should read the report, and the structure of it was put that it was in a trust fund, and the trustee of the trust fund has made it clear that they have no claims against the Treasury. So people could create whatever expectations they want that are convenient for them to create, but the reality is money was put into a trust fund that had no claim against the Treasury. Okay, it can't go out and call up the Fed and call up Scott Bessent and say, send me over a few $1 trillion here. I can't make my payments. And they say I have no legal constitutional obligation, to do so. I'm not allowed to do so. So people have been warned, and they were warned that that the money that they were expecting would not be there because they were not adequately funded, and people ignore the warnings.
Well,
So
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, I think this is an incomplete picture of reality. Have you ever heard of a single candidate for Congress or the president say, we're not going to satisfy the promises that we made?
Yeah, but people
always in the past. I'm just telling you, as a political reality for 50 years or more, everybody reasonably expects, they come up with those charts, but they'll do something. Whether they have to borrow the money, because it's not fixed. They can come up with any way they want. It's not like the Constitution says you can't ask the Fed to do this. And so when for 50 years, despite your accurate description of, hey, you're going to have to find money someplace else because the incoming FICA taxes aren't going to cover Social Security, everybody believes that's just phony. It never really happens. And not a single congressman has ever gone out and told the constituents, you're going to suffer a 25% cut in your benefits. Zero.
Yeah, well,
so we're talking about reality and expectations, Jeffrey.
Well, the question is, yeah, I can understand that I'm listening to the person I want to listen to. I have a trust fund telling me they're bankrupt and they have no money, and they've got a politician who I know lie all the time telling me, "Don't worry, Hakuna Matata." So it's my responsibility to know who's the bullshitter and who's telling the truth. Are my expectations? I think. Look, I don't want to continue this argument, but for me, it's very simple. I think anyone who relies upon the word of a politician and the promises they make, okay, is an idiot. Okay, so what are because none of their promises come true. So there should be no expectation that anyone should take anything they have to say, very seriously. So we do have serious people who are reporting reports, and they're the right people. Do I give a politician who has no control over the trust fund, who basically bullshits all the time, or a trustee from a trust fund who tells the truth? Who do I choose to pay attention to? So it's my responsibility to pay attention to the person of knowledge, not to the idiot, who's pandering. So if people's expectations were, I got an idiot pandering to me, and I got a knowledgeable person telling me the truth, and I'm going to pay attention to the idiot who's pandering to me rather than the expert who's telling me the truth, that's my fault. That's on me. So you and I can disagree on that. For me, I don't want to tax my children, my grandchildren, because my generation basically decided to listen to the idiot pandering to them and ignored the expert who was telling them the truth. So this way they'll learn the lesson that you don't listen to the idiot pandering to you. You listen to the expert telling you the truth. So if not, the lesson taught from it is you can ignore the expert telling you the truth and pay attention to the idiot pandering you, and that you should expect the fact that future generations should be obligated to be binded to fulfill promises made by an idiot who was pandering to you, who was not really had the authority to make the promises that they made. So that's my opinion, and we noted that you disagree with it.
Yeah. I don't like to use the word disagreement. I just think, because I don't want to suggest that I disrespect the rationality of what you've expounded. I just think that there can be additional angles in which to look at it, and I would give different weights to expectations than you would, especially because I understand what you're saying about why you believe any politician, but I do think it's pretty hard to tell the ordinary citizen you need to hold yourself to a higher standard than the people who represent you and purportedly are your leaders. I mean, that's a little bit odd. It's like saying that the parents hold the child to a higher standard than them. Wait a minute. The child's supposed to be able to learn from you, not the other way around. But I understand, we don't live in a rational universe. But what I want to go, if we can just segue here to this other topic, and this is, I want to go to the decision last Friday, the tariff decision, where the Supreme Court held 6-3 that President Trump does not have authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, basically to do anything that he wanted. The president argued, I can impose a tariff one day, all against an entire country, product by product. I could shift the tariff the next day. There are no limits on what I can do, into duration, into reasons or otherwise. And the court held that the statute simply did not authorize him to use tariffs as a vehicle for addressing an alleged national economic emergency. Now, the court did not. There are other statutes than what we call in the profession IEPA that do more explicitly give the president tariff authority. They are not quite as comprehensive. But I think, to my mind, what showed how far gone we are in terms of flouting and ignoring fundamental separation of powers was what the court did not do. Now, let's go back, Jeffrey, and review the two executive orders that were cited in order to trigger the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. One executive order said, we are confronting a national economic emergency because a few drips of fentanyl enter the country from Canada. Really? Then the other executive order said, we're confronting a national economic emergency because we're running trade deficits, which we've done for the last, 80 years. I mean, preposterous assertions, right? Have no relationship to reality. And the court didn't say, well, why are we even here in the IAPN? And the court also did not challenge the fact that assuming that Trump's interpretation of his tariff authority was correct, the president can do whatever he wants. I mean, we know that he was saying, going to impose surcharges on Brazil because I don't like their treatment of Bolsonaro, his political buddy. I'm going to impose super tariffs on any country that recognizes the Palestinian Authority because I like Netanyahu and I want to help him out.
Didn't he add tariffs? Didn't he add tariffs to Canada because of the advertisement they made with respect to Reagan and tariffs?
Yeah. That they were in favor of free trade. Yeah. I mean, he does it anything. He doesn't like the prime minister there because prime minister doesn't bow down and kiss the ring. I mean, Trump was basically saying, if he wanted to, under his theory of limitless delegated power, Norway didn't give me a Nobel Peace Prize. 100% tariffs, banned imports from Norway, right? I mean, Denmark not giving me Greenland, tariffs, whatever he wants. I mean, you could see how he could destroy businesses overnight. And he's saying that I could change their business plan every 24 hours. 15% one day, 100% the next day, 10% the next day. He could cut slack and say, and this company is subject to the tariffs, and this is not subject to the tariffs. That is, his interpretation of his authority was infinite. He could write an entire tariff code for all the millions of businesses in the United States and change them at the drop of a hat. Okay? Anybody, he could do this. He could say, those who contribute to building my ballroom, they don't have to pay any tariffs, right? Okay. I mean, this is despotism gone riot. And the court didn't raise an eyebrow about any of this. I said, and you're calling this a conservative decision? We know what, and the other thing that was conspicuous in my mind, the court went out of its way, Jeffrey, to say, well, these were peacetime tariffs. If they were wartime tariffs, that's another deal. Well, we already know at least two things. Trump has said we're at war with Venezuela. They're attacking us. They're invading us through gangs, sponsored gangs. Even if you can't see them, that's because you're deficient in eyesight. Not that they really aren't shooting artillery cells and, dropping drones on us every day. The second thing he said is, we are also at war if I think you're a narco-terrorist. Now, what is a narco-terrorist? Anybody I say you are, right? And he could, in theory, in his theory of the war power, he could say I'm at war with the whole world because we're running trade deficits, and therefore impose the tariff. Say now these are wartime measures. I mean, this is so. If this didn't go to the crux of the problem, we live in a post-constitutional world where the presidents do virtually whatever they want. They just need to use the right semantics, and the court didn't put a dent in any of that. In my mind, this shows for sure our savior is not going to come from this court.
Yeah, let me
Congress or nothing.
Let me ask you a few questions about the tariff thing, and then I want to make another point about the tariff after these questions, and these are obviously leading questions. Now, in my understanding, the justices on the Supreme Court all have law degrees, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Although, by the way, Jeffrey, it's not a constitutional requirement.
No, I know it's not.
There has not been any justice who didn't have a law degree, correct?
Yeah, I know it's not a constitutional requirement. But in fact they do. They all have law degrees. Okay, so they understand that normally when you refer to somebody like a narco-terrorist or you're at war, if they learn something about writing contracts, and in writing contracts, you basically have language that says, gee, if I use this word, it's going to be a defined term, so that whenever we use this term, every time we use this word, everyone has agreed to what the meaning of that word is. Is that correct?
Oftentimes, yeah, you will have something that's and sometimes in statutes too. For purposes of this contract, this word means so and so. Correct.
Yeah, a narco-terrorist, there should be a defined term. Okay, it's not. It should not be. I call narco-terrorist, and defined term means whatever I want it to mean and whoever I want it to mean to. A court would say, gee, when you define the narco-terrorist, what's the criteria defining who is a narco-terrorist, as opposed to you're a narco-terrorist because you voted against the my tariffs, so you're a terrorist because I say so.
Yeah.
So so my point is that usually when you use these words and you want these words to have legal meaning, there should be an agreement upon what that word means, and there should be acceptance upon people of what that word means. And it's usually, and you don't go to court saying, yeah, I'm throwing these words out and I can tell you what the meaning is. The meaning is what I say it is. Okay. Doesn't have to be what anybody else says it is. It has to be what I say it is. So ignore what everybody else has to say. I got a title in front of me, and because I have this title in front of me, that means my definition goes, even though it's not in the Constitution, even though Congress has never confirmed that definition, even though you have courts have never opined on it. And I don't even need to tell you how I define it. I just need to act upon my own definition of those words that I never need to have to disclose to you what my criteria is for using those words. I mean, that's the point of the fact that anyone who has practiced any law should find completely unacceptable use of language in that way, okay? Because that's what lawyers are trained to do. Lawyers are trained to give words meaning, and that meaning when all the parties involved in it, when people throw out words, they should at least generally agree upon what the definition of that word is, and they've all agreed upon that word. So, we have this president using words that he doesn't really define, and he thinks he doesn't really have to define, and the courts are affirming the words he uses without even knowing and letting him define it in whatever way he wants to, or have it without definition, and the courts are fine with that. That would seem to be contrary to everything about their legal education, in my point of view. So I'd like to hear your
Yeah.
response to that.
No, well, I agree, but unfortunately, there are a couple of Congress oftentimes doesn't want to define the words like they could. They could have defined national emergency in the IEPA, but they didn't. And part of it is because, hey, it'll make it more difficult to get consensus and pass a law. So they want to have a law passed, and then if it goes haywire, they blame somebody else in interpreting the statute. That is, but what you've described is what ought to happen. But Congress doesn't want to do that. They want to leave ambiguities there. They can all claim victory, right? All run victory laps. And if it doesn't turn out their way when a court interprets the statute, then they just blame somebody else. My view is that when the language is so opaque, the U.S. Supreme Court should say that's not a law. That in order to reach the threshold of law, you have to have a clarity of meaning, that it can be applied without stargazing. And when you're not at that level, it's not a law. Go back. But the court hasn't done that.
That was the next point I wanted to get to. Is the fact is, if Congress makes a law so vague that they're really delegating powers that they probably don't have the right to delegate and are doing it by being ambiguous about it, the court should reject that and go back to Congress and say, if this was your intention, write it over again. Yeah. So, but until you write it over again, we're not letting the president assume that in this vacuum, that's space for the president to assume Article 1 powers. Yeah. So if you write out clearly what your delegation is, the terms and circumstances which is delegated, and we'll make a judgment upon whether the Constitution lets you delegate that or not. It should to me, it should be that simple.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why in my judgment, the right decision would have been IEPA is unconstitutional because it's given unconstitutional leeway for the president to do whatever he wants. And that was a decision that was made equivalent in what we call the Schechter Poultry and Panama Refining, but this was almost 100 years ago, where the court said the same thing with regard to the National Recovery Act of the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt. But that was the last time. That's the last time they did something like this in 100 years. But I can guarantee you, read those cases, Schechter Poultry and Panama Refining, and the delegation there, it's exactly the same as the delegation under IEPA. Do whatever you want. Why is one constitutional, the other not? Because we've grown into accepting, an administrative state where the executive power is virtually infinite.
What do you think? You might not be aware of Besson's comments. I think they're today, actually, but I'm not sure. But I just saw an interview, a interview with him. So I don't know if this was today or yesterday, but there's a discussion about, the refunds. Now, the way I look at it is, initially there was initially the administration was sued in one court and they lost. They were sued in another court and lost. So the two court rulings on the tariffs were that they were illegal. The administration ignored those court rulings, and they had the right to ignore them, and kept collecting money, even though the only court guidance they had was, well, we're not quitting an injunction, but so you can keep doing it, but we're letting keep doing it at your risk, because as the facts have been presented to us, you're collecting money you should not collect. But we know another court will eventually opine on this. So if you want to take the risk and keep collecting the money that there's a good chance will be deemed illegal, which might mean you're engaging in theft. But go ahead and keep doing it. We're not going to stop you. And which is basically what the courts did, said it's illegal, but we don't want to stop you, or maybe we can't stop you. And the prediction markets were also overwhelmingly predicting that these tariffs would be deemed illegal. So every signal they had from the marketplace and from courts were what they were doing was illegal and against the law. Okay, so Besant is a guy who understands markets. So he understands, and there's somebody in the administration must have some knowledge of the law and know that there were two adverse rulings against it, and who knows if any one of them were honest and told Trump, you're probably going to lose in this case, or who knows if he was told that, if he even paid attention, to somebody telling him that. So and also the fact that the markets were overwhelming. So now that the government has collected all this money illegally, where it's had a lot of indications that it was doing so illegally, where this ruling should have never come as a surprise, Bessent is basically arguing that he can't refund the money, that the courts gave him no instructions to refund the money, and that basically lower courts will have to make a ruling. So it kind of sounds like everybody who had their money taken from them that in an illegal way are now going to have to use the courts to get their money back, and the government is going to assume no responsibility for saying, I took the money, I should have known not to take it, I took it anyway, and now that I took money from you that I never should have really taken from you, I'm going to make it your burden to figure out how you're going to get it back. I mean, what do you think about that?
No, it's a staggering mess. And the lower courts, I think, are going to have to struggle with the refund mechanism. The over $100 billion collected. But you can see, Jeffrey, the way that the law works shows why it's a mess. Because if you're the litigant, you are able to be made whole. That is, you shouldn't be worse off because of the illegality. Now the government will argue, all right, well, who paid the tariffs, right? It's the importer paid the tariffs. But the importer, to a greater or lesser degree, passed on the cost of the tariff to consumers or the next person down in the stream of commerce. So if I'm the government, I'll say, well, okay, you paid 15% tariff, but you passed 12.5 on your customers. So you only were damaged by X. The customers are going to have to come in and show that they were the victims of the illegality because they ended up paying more than otherwise.
I'm going to interrupt you because as you're saying this, give me one thought. Trump has made the argument, or his administration, is that basically the importers paid the cost of the tariffs. I mean, the exporters, by basically taking lower margins, and the Americans have not paid. So if you listen to Trump's argument, they should be giving the money to China, right. and other countries because the claims they have made is they've absorbed the cost of the tariff.
Yeah.
So if you take them at their own words, who should they be? They need to pay back somebody. They took somebody's money that's not theirs. They can't keep it. Okay, you can't profit, from ill-gotten gains. So,
but sometimes that's not true. Sometimes that's not true because you could see, Jeffrey, that because the elements that go into a price are very numerous and they aren't constant. So trying to figure out who paid the full incidence of the tariffs is going to be staggeringly expensive. And you figure over 150 billion. Can you imagine how many hearings you're going to have if you want to argue over dollars and cents? So, I mean, one way that they might do this is maybe if you're choosing between making sure that crime or illegality doesn't pay, you tell the government you got to refund all of it. And if it means the importers get all of it, even if they get a little bit, even if they pass some on to the consumers, the importers didn't do anything wrong. And if they get a windfall, it's a windfall because the government did something illegal. That's one way to approach it. I don't know whether the courts will do that. They could say, well, if you have to show us as a claimant, as a plaintiff, how much of that tariff you passed on to your consumers, and you can make sure you're made whole, but we're not going to give you a windfall because the government did something illegal. I mean, you can see those different approaches to trying to deal with the refund issue, but it's going to be a huge mess for sure.
Yeah. Well, many of the companies had decided that they either would absorb the losses themselves, and so they were careful about raising prices. And maybe what I would trust is if a company paid it and paid some of the cost onto their workers and the consumers, then the company's best interest would be, to the extent that they got the money back, that they would do something below the people that they helped impose the cost and the marketplace, and they'd want to have that reputation.
Yeah, of course. It's goodwill. It's goodwill.
So the companies would want goodwill. So if the company paid it, but the incidence was somewhat transferred to other third parties, you could trust in a competitive marketplace that the companies would buy goodwill and decided if they would keep it all themselves, that basically they might develop a bad reputation. And so that's what you can trust. The companies are more likely to do the right thing for goodwill purposes, than and they already showed that goodwill because they didn't pass all the cost on to consumers and to workers. In the beginning they were absorbing most of the cost themselves. So a number of companies made announcements to that effect. So it seems to me that would be, the just thing.
Mhm.
Would you, if you were in the administration, would you be telling them, wait for the courts to settle this? Or would you be meeting with people and say, how do we get people's money back? I mean, you wouldn't have been party to this decision to begin with of taking
No.
people's money away. But if Trump called you up and said, Bruce, I really messed up here. I want to do the right thing. I want to act in a just way. Tell me what I should be doing now. What advice would you be giving him?
Well, I mean, I think maybe the analogy again is most of them are imperfect. Think of the way we have this pot of money, right? And we're trying to divide it up in a way that's fair to everybody who assumed the burden of paying for the illegal exactions. And you might even want to have something like the arbitration that was done with regard to the victims of 9/11. Okay, here's the total amount of money. We want to try to minimize the transaction costs. And you could have kind of a super czar, maybe one person you would make your claim and this is what you believe you suffered, and you would have a very speedy administrative process. The government would be required to refund everything because you don't want to encourage a repetition. But that's a way you could try to minimize the transactional costs by having the individual claimants. And you could even have categories. I'm not sure how you would deal this, in terms of the industries that were more likely to pass on the cost or not. And you could just have an automatic, this is the percent of the tariff that would be paid by the importer, and this is the one that would go to their suppliers or their buyers or something like that. It's going to be rough and ready. It's not going to be perfect, but I think that model that has been used in so-called disaster areas, I think they did this, in the Gulf of Mexico when you had the BP blowout and you're trying to assess the damages through an arbitration process. That's probably what I would advise be done in this case.
If you were a judge and people were coming back to you filing their claims and their lawsuits to get the money back from the government, and the government was saying, well, we don't want to give it all back to you because your workers, we want every employee to come and file a lawsuit with us, saying that their paycheck was reduced by $5, and so we want them all coming back and basically having to pay for, and we want them to come individually. We don't want them to be able to file a class action lawsuit. We want to make the cost so high of them collecting so that they don't collect. So, we want to deter collection because we want to keep the money as much as possible. And by the way, we all kind of knew this was illegal, but decided to do it anyway because we knew it would be a mess paying it off in the future. And now we're talking about doing the same thing over again because this is a profitable business. What do you think the responsibility of the judges is to make sure the government doesn't continue to profit from its illegal behavior?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It ought to be for sure that they make sure that the government doesn't get to keep a penny of it. It's just a matter of how you
I don't think it's sufficient that the money doesn't keep a penny of it. You don't think there should be damages associated with the government's behavior?
Well, with regard to here, I'm not exactly sure what you would consider the damages. I mean, other than refunding all the money, how do you impose the damages? Congress could impose, you can have impeachable offenses and have demotions. I'm not sure how you would calculate anything, Jeffrey, other than the amount of money they collected.
If it cost me $90 to get $100 back, and the government has imposed on me a $90 cost to get $100 back, where I only put $10 in my pocket for the government taking $100 out of my pocket, the question is that fair? If the
No, no,
government is,
but I
if the
think
government has imposed
maybe
a
I
cost
think
on
you're.
me,
I'm
if
not.
the
I
government has
think you're
imposed a
not.
cost on me
No, no,
collecting
no.
my money,
Listen, I'm thinking you didn't interpret me correctly. Obviously, if you want to have the government, and I'm not sure, in legal language, it's not called damages, but you say the government's got to refund all of the tariffs collected, and it's got to pay the costs and attorney's fees of those who had to absorb, undertake or these costs in order to get their proportion back. So you're still made whole. You're not in a deficit because the cost that you incurred in getting your money back is also paid by the government. But those typically are not, in the eyes of the law, called damages.
no, I
They're just called
understand that.
transactional.
Yeah, that's just the government paying your court costs. That
Yeah,
the government acted badly, and whatever money you spend having to get it back, the government is going to reimburse you.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. So you think the government should reimburse people for all the costs associated with recovering its money?
Yeah, they need to be made whole for sure. That's what it is. Now I'm thinking, and you are correct here. The government basically was trying to argue a little bit of blackmail. They're telling, oh, you can't do this. It's going to be a huge mess. You'll cause all sorts of consternation in the economic. Trying to get them to back down. And say, okay, we won't want to do this. Maybe if it's illegal, but we got to make it legal because the consequences of declaring it illegal are too great, and we don't want to accept that responsibility. But that argument didn't work. But it was an argument that was made by the executive branch and by Mr. Trump. Hey, we've done things so illegal. We've committed. If it's like saying, if we only did an illegality that stole $1 billion, okay, we can deal with that. But we did grand larceny. No, you can't undo grand larceny because it's got too many destabilizing effects. I said, wow, that really turns the idea of justice on its head. The greater the crime, the less ability to deter it and to sanction it.
The greater the crime, the
That's
less
the world we live in, Jeffrey. That's the world we live in. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
Yes. And I think that it's horrible that Congress has stayed silent on this.
Yeah, totally. In fact, they even when the House adopted a rule when there was an effort to try to get a vote on specifically blocking some of the tariffs, adopted a rule saying you can't vote on it until 6 or 8 months or something. So they handcuffed themselves so no one could be put in the embarrassing position, of having voted in favor of this stuff, or refusing to vote against it. Again, it's protectionist to try to limit their accountability for all the stupidity that goes on.
Now, is it true that there's no proactive measure that the administration can do to start paying people back until people start filing lawsuits?
No, they can do that on their own. They do not need a court order to give the money back. No way. They can
So by doing so, they only want to make it more expensive for people to get their money back.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're attempting to profit off their theft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to make crime pay. See,
that's our Treasury Secretary.
Yeah,
okay. We want to make crime pay. Okay, but that's not impeachable.
No, not under this Congress. It's impeachable to other Congresses, but this one, no way. But see, and that's what comes back, Jeffrey. I think that ultimately, the courts can do so much, but they're limited. If you don't have a Congress that's willing to say, and because impeachable offenses doesn't have to be a crime, you don't have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just doing something that we know is wrong. It runs against the grain of what we understand as fairness and decency in public life. And remember, impeachment doesn't mean you go to Siberia. It doesn't mean you have the guillotine. It means you're out of here, Move on to your life, Go ahead, but you're not going to be in government. And so, and the fact that, and if Congress used the impeachment power the way it should, they discipline the first time because this is just indecent and unfair. You're gone. It wouldn't happen again. But they don't do that. They don't. And they don't understand impeachment. It's not a crime. It's not capital punishment. It's not the guillotine. It's not Siberia, just like firing the CEO like Trump did on The Apprentice every show. So why are you going into conniption fits? Anyway, it's part of what I call constitutional illiteracy that handicaps our going forward with brains.
So now to the next issue. Canon's Canon.
Yeah.
So, so why don't you give us your legal opinion on her legal opinion with respect to that it would be I think her words were a manifest injustice to all the parties involved to have anything transcripts released of what she called an illegal investigation.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
don't know what it made it illegal.
yeah.
So you know,
I don't know. Yeah, she's the one who has been reversed by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Now, I think that where she goes astray is, she, of course, she's just a cheerleader for Trump, but in our system, transparency is the rule. Secrecy is the very, very rare exception. Based upon our good friend Justice Louis Brandeis, sunshine is said to be the best of disinfectants, the electric lamp the most effective policeman. Okay, there may be some unfairness, but the benefits of transparency are enormous, priceless in deterring wrongdoing, and plus informing the American people what their government is doing, what's going on. They can make their independent judgment. When government is transparent, it doesn't mean that they can't add additional information if they want to make an argument. Others can defend it, criticize it, but it's part of what we call the free marketplace of ideas. American people then make their own assessment. Not everything has to be be a crime in order for the American people to know things happen. You can vote people out of office for doing things far less than a felony. And there was, and in this particular instance, given the fact that there have been so many political hay made out of those who are condemning Jack Smith, he really had no evidence at all. It was just a witch hunt, and it should have never even been begun. The American people are entitled to look at the evidence themselves, evaluate it. Was it credible or not? They can do additional information, but that's what government should be about. And she identified nothing that suggests information in the public domain is going to cause any kind of harm. Where's the harm? More information rather than less. People can make their own assessment. It's not the entire universe of information, but certainly very, very important information that was collected by the government. And it's important for the people to know whether, in their assessment, the government had a bona fide, a legitimate investigation underway, or was just a complete legal fiction to go in revenge against certain people. And that's why my view is that the likelihood of this decision surviving appeal is slim and none. This is going to get into the public domain.
Who has the right to appeal? Who would have standing to appeal this decision?
The media. See, what has happened here, it was the Knight Foundation and other media groups had petitioned to have this released because under federal common law, every court federal documents are presumed public unless there's a decision that there would be some compelling interest otherwise. So we have the Knight Foundation. The journalism, the media community is appealing the decision already. It's already in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. And we found, there are similar kinds of disclosures. We had grand jury information in Watergate that was public. It was shared with the U.S. House of Representatives and their Judiciary Committee. It doesn't happen every day, but oftentimes, we had the Mueller report that was reported as well, even it didn't eventuate in actual criminal charges. When we have independent counsels, they filed reports whether there were charges that were lodged or not. So we had confidence that the investigation was bona fide and legitimate. It may well be on an individual basis. If you have a minor, you could redact the name here or there. But in general, the overwhelming idea in a free country is transparency. And that obviously wasn't done in this particular case. Her basic reasoning, Jeffrey, was, well, These people weren't convicted, in part because Trump dismissed the case against himself. They weren't convicted because of her rulings. The bizarre ruling, for example, that Jack Smith wasn't even legally appointed. And then because she blocked the convictions, then she's going to hide everything else because they would cast dispersion on what she did. I think she had a conflict of interest, to be candid. But this is, in my judgment, is going to have a very short shelf life.
And so would BitChute have standing to file an appeal?
Yes, when there are documents that are secret under federal law, you would if you filed the lawsuit, you would have standing to get access to it. Yes, you would. I mean, any member of the public really has a right of access to, because the federal courts are presumed to be open and transparent. And if you want a copy of the proceedings, you're entitled to walk in and ask for a copy.
Oh, this is interesting. I hadn't considered that, but maybe this is something I will think about. And again, I would not do it for the benefit of targeting Trump. I just think that the public had if everybody had kept quiet about Smith, I'd say,
it'd be a different deal. Yeah,
it would be a different thing. But the point of it is, aspersions have been cast on Smith, and he's had no ability to defend himself. Because he's had his mouth shut while everybody else can speak, and nobody should think that's fair. Yeah. So nobody should think that's fair. And if it's not fair, it's not just. So this doesn't seem like a fair or just outcome. The manifest of justice has been to Smith, and Trump has been allowed to use the bully pulpit to say a lot of things, and a lot of things under the protection of, of complete immunity. And so, it's not a fair game, and the courts should have made it a fair game. And I think the people, unfortunately, about the cases that are mostly related to what actually happened in 2020, we've never had. The people have never really been able to see much testimony under oath. They all got killed. They successfully killed Fannie Willis. I mean, not literally, figuratively, but her case in Georgia. Even though she got convictions or people that pleaded guilty, so it looks like she apparently had a solid case that when they removed her from the case for, I think, dubious reasons, then basically they couldn't find. It seems like they couldn't find anyone else who would prosecute the case.
No, they did have a successor, Jeffrey, and he said, I looked at it and it's not worth prosecuting. So it really wasn't much recent decision, but there was a successor who dropped the whole case.
No, I think the successor was somebody who had a position, who was responsible, was to find somebody who would litigate.
Yeah, he couldn't find anybody and said, I'm taking it over and I'm dropping it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But he couldn't find anyone. And then and we don't know how hard he looked trying to find anyone. Yeah. But maybe nobody wanted to take the case because of the burden associated with what was involved in taking that case. So, it seems like we've had the American people under. I mean, think about what happened in 2020, and there'll be actually no trial associated with what role the president had, who was the ringleader of what happened in 2020, and we'll never get to the truth. Okay, yeah. I mean, this is the thing: is I don't know what he's guilty of and what he isn't. What we know is he's been able to tell his side of the story, and there hasn't been an adequate ability for other people to tell the other side of the story, and that we really deserve to hear it, under oath. And Congress has not compelled him to testify under oath, and the courts, now have not compelled him to testify under oath. So, I think it's a national tragedy. I think it's a stain on this country, that we've not had. Maybe if there would have been a bipartisan investigation and Republicans would have cooperated with Democrats, and maybe if the Democrats might have been a little more reasonable. I don't know if they were reasonable or not reasonable. But if we would have had if we would have had hearings like Watergate, and I think 2020 deserved the Watergate type of hearings.
Yeah.
We had it for Watergate. We had it for Iran Contra. People were subject to tough questioning. There was an attempt to get at the truth. And if we have to take a look at the break-in and Watergate, Iran Contra, and then looking to steal the 2020 election, I don't know how we can say that what happened in 2020 is trivial, compared to the other things. It certainly is not trivial. We, for the first time in history, we had a contested transfer of power. We had Congress, members of Congress running for their lives, and we had Congress shut down for about 4 hours, when we were trying to certify a president, and to think that doesn't deserve hearings comparable to what we did for Watergate and Iran Contra, and what we did for Benghazi. Okay,
Yeah.
So and to feel that this was a lower magnitude, I think that's a stain on the history of how the institutions, every institution, malfunctioned. The executive
And I
branch.
think you've omitted, Jeffrey, the church committee hearings too. Those were under oath. That was national security. Richard Helms, we got head of the CIA, and they were public. Some of them were private, but they were serious hearings and they were under oath. Really, and this doesn't qualify. It's just an earmark of how much decayed our political culture has become.
Yeah. And the only thing I want to take sides in, I'm not ready to indict Trump.
No.
What I want to do is I want the truth. I think I'm entitled to the truth. We had Congress invaded. We had members of Congress running for their lives because, however people want to rewrite history, they were running for their lives. Okay, so they went into hiding. Okay, we had invaders come. They took over the Capitol. Correct? They took it over for about 4 hours. Okay, members of Congress were in hiding. They weren't welcoming people. As Tucker Carlson had said, these were just visitors. They weren't there waiting. High-fiving the visitors, having them sit, occupying the gallery. No, they all fled. They fled. There was violence. Cops died subsequent to this. We had this woman who horribly died. This was a very, very ugly event, and it was successful for 4 hours. It succeeded, in occupying the Capitol during its certifying the president. So
and Jeffrey, you missed the theme song, "Hang Mike Pence." It wasn't just the members. Mike Pence and his family were endangered, and they had Secret Service there. They wanted to remove him from the Capitol. He wouldn't go because he wanted to stay and count the votes. But that was the theme song of the rioters, "Hang Mike Pence." And when Trump was alerted to that, he said he deserves it. I mean, this is like The Godfather or something, Really? And there's no consequence for this?
So I want to know the truth about everything, about the decisions, about the security for the event, why it took so long to get the National Guard there, why it seems like even after it was requested, it still took long, even after the request went out. Where was the Defense Department? I mean, why at that point in time was Trump not answering the phone? What would the phone logs? I guess the reason we understood for the phone logs is just trying to understand who was not what were the conversations, but who Trump was talking to during while this was going on. I mean, so how long those calls were for? I mean, from what I've read, there's no eavesdropping. Nobody knows what the content of those calls would be. They just wanted to have a record of ingoing and outgoing calls of who Trump was in communication with, and we should know what they were doing. What were the people who were in contact with Trump saying during this period of time? Were they plotting? Don't we have a right to know, saying, yeah, we're trying to get you the fake electors you need so that when we get back, we can elect you president? I mean, wouldn't we have a right to know that? Or were they telling the president?
We do know, Jeffrey, we do know a call that wasn't made. It was Pence, not Mr. Trump, that called out the security forces to end the rioting. Mr. Trump did not make that call. Mike Pence did. So, and that doesn't show complicity. I mean, were you born yesterday?
So we don't think we have a right to know of all those people Trump was calling and what he was trying to accomplish with those calls. We don't have a right to know that.
But it was even the Democrats on the congressional committee on the January 6th attack. They didn't try. They issued a subpoena to Trump, but then dropped it. They never ever called Mike Pence to testify. I mean, how anemic can you be? These are the prime players. It would be like the Nuremberg trial, and you decided you weren't going to prosecute Hermann Goering and Albert Speer. I mean, really? It'd be absurd, but that's what happened here. We had Cassidy Hutchinson or whatever, but she's down there on the food chain. Why didn't you go after the highest people? And that's what we ended up with the Nixon and the tapes case. They subpoenaed Richard Nixon, the White House.
Yes.
You got to hand over the tapes. And he did hand them over. He was required to. Anyway, it's just another earmark of the plunge, of Congress into virtual irrelevance.
Yes, it's very sad, and I think it's really pathetic. So and Canon just proves that as many people say, who said law is an ass or something like that.
Yeah, no, this is in Oliver Twist. Okay, in Mr. Bumble makes this famous remark: if the law supposes that, the law is a ass, a idiot. Yes. I used that in one of my filings recently. That's what I said. Okay, actually, it was because if anyone cares about the background of the comment, in British common law at that time, the husband or wife were viewed as the same, as a single entity, and the husband was the entity. Well, in Oliver Twist, Mrs. Bumble dominates Mr. Bumble like everything, right? So when the law was trying to hold Mr. Bumble accountable for what his wife did, because he was the one in the eyes of the common law that was the one representative of the couple, he said, "Are you kidding me? The law is a ass and idiot. If it's supposed that I run this family as opposed to Mrs. Bumble." Anyway, that's the background of that comment. Right?
But maybe it's appropriate under these circumstances.
Yeah.
So I hope. Is there any indication that people are going to file an appeal with respect to this ruling?
Yes, it's already right as we speak. In a related way, it was already in the 11th Circuit. It's definitely going on appeal. And I feel quite confident it will be reversed, and ultimately we will get access and look at it. Because remember, earlier on, Eileen made another decision with regard to a special review master, a master to examine documents before the Justice Department could, and it evokes such dismay in the 11th Circuit. They rebuked her in language that's quite atypical, and saying this is the most ridiculous thing we've ever seen. This was Trump-appointed judges as well as Biden-appointed judges. So I think the 11th Circuit already has great skepticism Eileen Cannon's handling with this case, and will probably reverse what she does in this decision to keep the documents secret.
Yeah, because we never got the opportunity of seeing whether her decisions regarding declaring
special prosecutor illegal, that got mooted. Yeah, it ended up being mooted.
Yes.
But so, we do know that one thing she said in her opinion, Jeffrey, that it was limited to her district court only, because the same argument had been rejected in the district courts here up in the District of Columbia. She knew its precedent was probably going to have a very short shelf life.
That's pretty absurd. Yeah. So it's only true here.
Yeah, right. Only in my courtroom does the special counsel have no standing. Everybody else, I don't care about that.
It's you never want to. It's always it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback and second guess people, uh, after the fact and see something that looked, that happened after the fact that maybe not have looked so obvious before the fact. Have you ever analyzed Smith's performance as opposed to where he defined jurisdiction and how he ended up in Eileen Cannon? And would you second guess some of the decisions he made as a prosecutor for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he could have kept the case in D.C. There's pretty fair amount of discretion you have here with regard to the what we call the espionage or the presidential documents case, because the documents were they were removed from Washington D.C. So you have a Washington D.C. contact with it. You also had Florida contact, so that means the venue was really an option of Smith, and I would have kept it in D.C. I would not gone to Florida, and keep all the. It's just for managerial purposes, it's easier, even if there's separate theories of illegality with regard to the riot issue and the presidential documents issue. But you could have this. But the players are going to be relatively the same. There's overlap there. The judges would get the information, and whether you have one judge could preside over both of the cases or whatnot. But surely, I do think going to Florida, risking somebody like Eileen Cannon was, a misjudgment. I think it was excessively cautious. My view of the situation overall, though, Jeffrey, is that the big error was made by Merrick Garland by sitting on the thing. He should have put it in high gear in 1 second's time. I just think he was so casual and so slow. I mean, this is the peaceful transfer of power in the United States history. Speed is of the essence. It just doesn't sit there. The precedent is frightening. And the evidence was there. This was this is the cell phone age. You got digital information, far more than there was at the time of Watergate. So it's not a matter of lacking proof. We know the proof was there, in part because look at all the cases that did go forward. The convictions were almost 99.9%. So that was the clog. You should have appointed special counsel immediately, and give them unlicensed authority to investigate and come up to a decision. Delegate it, and he's not a prosecutor. So you didn't run into this time lag, which is what enabled Trump to run out the clock. Now, on the other hand, it is true that the Supreme Court, however, also threw a spanner into the works. I still today, I couldn't possibly believe if I was the special prosecutor that the Supreme Court would rule the way they did. And part of the reason for the surprise is that if you look at the lower court decisions in this, with regard to presidential immunity, there was not a single judge, Court of Appeals, District Court, that said, okay, the president is immune. None. So this was just out of the blue. And these are not dumb judges. The U.S. Court of Appeals here in the district, they get to ordinarily serve here and then often get promoted to the Supreme Court. But none of them came close to the idea that the U.S. Supreme Court came up with. And Jack Smith, he did try to get the court to deal with this on an expedited basis, and the court wouldn't do it. I said, wow. I mean, Jeffrey, I lived in Watergate. The court took the tapes case, bypassed the Court of Appeals, boom. It made its decision in July 26th of 1974 in the summer. They took it that seriously. Expedited it. This one, casual, like it's really an odd.
It seemed to me the courts tried to help Trump.
Yeah, and the courts were clearly trying to help Trump. Yeah, that's most unfortunate. But that's why you can't rely upon the courts. And although with citizen awakening to our peril, enforcing Congress, that's the ultimate guardrail. The courts, they say, at best can put speed bumps. They're not going to do this. They're going to decide for us. Congress can, if we force Congress to do it. And Congress did do it in 1974. Can we make them do it again? It's up to us.
Exactly. Anything else that you want to talk about today before we say?
No, no. I think maybe the State of the Union address will be delivered tonight. I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about. Maybe our next session, but I think, and it's very very sad, and even more than sad, it's mortifying that we're going to hear Mr. Trump. He'll use vile epithets. Anybody who opposes him is a terrorist. They're a radical. They're a communist. They're a fascist. They're this or that. This is the United States of America. We began with George Washington. If we all believe in Darwin's theory of evolution, how can we be at this stage from George Washington to Donald Trump? And what's depressing is, instead of saying we can have legitimate disagreements, okay, you can express them. We don't disrespect other opinions, but we think this is misguided. And I certainly believe lots of things Democrats believe are misguided. A lot of them are Republicans too. It's just going to be a circus and a carnival, and it won't be the kind of session that ought to be the case, where we can have a sensible reflection on where we are as a country and how we can go forward, trial and error, and try to make everybody a winner. And it's just the same old that we experience 24 hours a day. And it really does nothing other than further divide the country, which is not what we need.
Well, thank you. Well, I'd like to remind people, unless I get another oral surgery that is unexpected, we will be back on our usual time on Monday at 12 noon Eastern. So, Bruce, thank you for being available today. And I think between today and next Monday, we'll figure out what would be the appropriate topic to talk about.
Yeah.
For this.
Yeah, we may have an attack on Iran in the midday. Trump tells us it could be 3 days, maybe 15 days. Who knows? We don't really know what our approach is in Iran, why we're supposed to be there, other than we drop bombs. But that's what it keeps us nimble. You got to be agile here and move from one topic to another.
Well, remember what he said. Yeah. He can't have the fun of putting tariffs wherever he wants, but he can still have the fun of destroying countries whenever he wants.
Yeah.
Have a great day, Bruce.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jeffrey. Bye-bye.
Bye.